All right. I think you should be able to see the slides as well. And I'll talk a little bit about what it is, my presentation, my research, but most of all, I will keep an eye on the chat as well. So if people have any questions or clarifications, feel free to jump in. I think with this online interactions, people are already a bit, quiet, sitting away. There is more distance. So I don't mind if people just use the chat to share what any questions they have. And I also don't mind if people unmute and just jump in at any point. All right. First things before I start about my presentation is I know also Thomas Peter I saw on the list of keynote speakers, so I'm sure he might mention this as well. But one thing I do want to mention is that if there's any students or young professionals listening to the conference, or maybe or listening to the recording later, in May, there is a big international humanitarian conference called the HNPW, Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week. And this is a conference where a lot of humanitarian organizations, players, actors meet and discuss a whole range of topics. I saw Phil Crook is also on the call, and he's a speaker about training and simulation. He will also be there running a group on simulation and training. And one of the things we would like to do is we'd like to also invite a younger generation. We'd like to invite students. We'd like to invite young professionals to join the conference and share their ideas and join the table. But to help them, we set up this network to bridge the gap. So if there's any students who are interested, feel free to send me an email or sign up, and we will help you in your way joining this large conference. And I will put the link in the chat as well. Well, about myself, if it was already mentioned in the introduction, so this can be brief, is I focus on information management. And I do this as an academic in my research and in my classes. But I don't only study this from the university. I also try to get involved and support information management and crisis response as much as possible. Because I believe it is a field that you cannot fully understand by just studying literature or talking to people. Crisis management is for a large portion dependent on the operational setting, whether that's virtually or it's in field in a tent or some other reason. But it is too easy to study crisis management or information management from afar and reflect on it and say what we could do better without realizing the circumstances that people are doing this in. I know that we should share information. I know we should set up right structures. But when you're in a crisis, you don't always have the time and the capabilities for it. So it's really important we consider this in our research. And for me, there's also an ethical part of it. If we know how we can do better crisis management, we have a responsibility to also do it, right? There's no point in writing it in a paper and hoping that a practitioner will read it. That means I think there's a moral obligation to be out there working alongside practitioners and helping to improve crisis response in some way. So this is why I try to combine my research with as said, as a work of a responder with the European Union or with the United Nations or the Red Cross. What I want to talk about today is really about information and information management in a crisis response. And very simply put, this is what that means to me, at least, what I often use in my research, what I often tell students and other colleagues. This is the sole purpose of what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to get the right information to the right people at the right time in the right format. What that is exactly depends very much on the situation and the person. A person who has lost their house needs different information presented to them in a different way than maybe a prime minister or a emergency responder. So information management is something that is very dependent on who I'm who I'm working for and who I'm supporting. The press briefing you give to a state official has no use for somebody who lost their home. But the information that somebody who lost their home needs to have is too detailed for somebody who is a state official. So you constantly need to adjust and keep the decision maker in mind. And of course, today there's a wonderful set of technologies that we can use to do this. So this sounds trivial, right? Especially if you have a sudden crisis, you start in a situation where there's a high level of uncertainty, and the decisions you're making are based on limited information. In the very first stages, you're using your gut feeling, you're using limited information, and almost the decisions you make are random or based on past experiences or similar situations. But as the crisis continues, you will get more and more information, and slowly your uncertainty will go down. You'll be better able to make decisions, but at least you will not have all the information, but at least you know what information you're missing and you need. And then as the crisis continues, you get into this stable state where there's a stream of information, the uncertainty goes down, and you can make well-informed, analyzed, and justified decisions. Anyway, that's the theory. So let's look at how that works in practice by looking at the Corona response here in the Netherlands. And in this response, I was involved as information manager for our national operational team Corona. So the way it started here in the Netherlands was that early January 2020, the different agencies around our country were preparing. There were the first signs that there was a virus going around, and in the Netherlands, we have 25 safety regions who all work independently from each other. They all have a small geographical area. And if you know our country, it's not big to begin with. So imagine you divide something very small into 25 regions. They all make their own assessments. So the first stage is there is this planning and preparedness. We see the virus and we're thinking what this means. But suddenly, there's the holiday season, early March. It means people are going on skiing holidays to France, abroad. There's also a carnival, which is like the feast at the start of Lent, a Catholic holiday, especially in the south. So a lot of people gather. So especially in the southern provinces, people go out in the streets and celebrate this feast, this festival together. And that means there's a rapid surge of COVID cases all of a sudden, which means that we're scaling up the response in the Netherlands. We have 5 or 4 different levels of emergency, and we call them GRIP, G-R-I-P. And before it was level 2, and all of a sudden, all the regions go to level 4, which is the highest we've ever had. And it's never happened that the whole country was at that level, which means now the mayors get involved, the regional political coordinator get involved, the national government is going to get involved. So on March 12th, in just 2 months, all of a sudden the country is on high alert. So on March 16th, 4 days later, we issue what we call the intelligent lockdown in the Netherlands. So this is the first time there is a press conference. The Prime Minister is on TV addressing the issue. And we're taking these measures, but at the end of March 2020, there is a high level of uncertainty. People are fearful. The population doesn't know what is happening. There is a lack of guidance. People don't know how to deal with the situation. And we get social behavior, adverse social behavior. People start hoarding. The lady you see here, the whole country learned what the sign language for hoarding is. So she looked it up, and this is our sign interpreter in the Netherlands. And everybody learned that sign at the press conference. So our Prime Minister said at that press conference, in a crisis, you have to take all your decisions with limited information. You take 100% of your decisions with 50% of the information. Remember the graph I showed you earlier, right? We're in this stage where we have high uncertainty, limited information, 100% decisions, 50% information. You just have to do it and you have to bear the consequences. So those of you who might know the theories of sense making might recognize that process, actually saying by taking action, you also generate information. And this is what's happening here. We don't know everything yet. We have to make decisions, and every decision we make also generates information that we can use. So what happens next is that all of a sudden we have these 25 regions all working on this crisis. So we need a national structure. We don't have an adequate structure in the Netherlands to deal with a pandemic of this scale. We have structures for floods, since half our country is below sea level. We have for massive severe weather, but there is not something that can deal with a pandemic, because now we're also dealing with not something that is geographically based. We have social behavior, we have economic effects, we have all these other issues playing alongside. So the answer is we're going to form a new team called the National Operational Team. And our job is to coordinate, to make sure that we take best practices from one region, give them to another, to make sure that we identify common issues in the Netherlands and bring them to the right players, that we identify solutions and bring them down. So we're really at the intersection between national government and regional government, between operational and political. To give you an idea, the Netherlands is incredibly complex when it comes to healthcare. This is just a small map, a piece of a map showing the different types of entities in our healthcare system. And this is only the healthcare. This is not talking about fire departments and all the other things. This is just every blue one is a type of agency in the Netherlands with a responsibility for a part of the healthcare system. So our job is to make sure that all these players are aware of what the other ones are doing. So the reality is actually not that graph I showed you earlier. It's much more messier, because especially in a pandemic, the uncertainty keeps going up. We're now 2 years into pandemic and we still have this uncertainty. And the information increases, right? There's more data than we ever had before because of technologies, because people use social media. So actually, it's becoming a bigger mess. We get more people involved, we have more information. At the same time, the situation is changing. So it's not a nice graph where the uncertainty goes down and the information goes up. The reality looks much more like this. So what do? We have this national team and we start scaling up because we realized this is too big for a small group. We need more people. So you imagine this national team was just formed a couple of weeks ago, and now we're going from maybe 50 people to 200 people doing the coordination. And you can imagine this brings challenges in information management. If you have a national agency that didn't exist before, you bring in 200 people with different backgrounds. How do you manage it? So one of the problems is we don't have a common language. Everybody has a different background and different expertise. There's people who are virologists. There are people from the fire department, civil defense, military. There's scientists like me. There are consultants from IT companies. Everybody is there and everybody has different ideas and experiences. We don't have a structure yet. Yes, we have a formal, there's a head and we have cells and all these things, but how do we really work together? There's no established procedures. We have to build the store, as somebody told me, we have to build the store while we're open for business. So we're figuring it out as we go. And what was interesting is because this was a new organization, everybody was super ambitious. We talked about innovation. We're going to do modeling. We're going to use AI. We're going to use data stores and data lakes and business intelligence and dashboards. And you know, the world is your oyster. But that didn't work because we were so focused on we didn't even know what we're doing. We didn't have procedures. We didn't have a framework. We didn't have a common language. So what are you going to do with your technology? So this led us to think, how do we do proper information management? Well, we have the data and we have the technology. There's hardware, software, and all these things. But on the other side, we also need to look at what people do we have? How are they trained? What is their background? Are they IT trained? Are they people who have You know, do we give them the right support? Do we have the right tools? Can they use them? And how are we organized? So this became our blueprint of how to organize information management. So let me show you what each of these elements exactly means when I talk about information management in such a team. Well, first of all, about data. I'm sure you're all thinking like, oh yeah, we're going to do data collection, APIs, crowdsourcing, all these things. But we quickly realized that we are not the ones that have the data, nor do we need to have the data. What I'm showing you here is an example of the funeral homes in the Netherlands. These funeral homes were important to us because there's a certain capacity for funerals and cremations. And if we have too many deaths, we need to store the bodies and we need to find a way. But why would we need the data? We don't need the data. We just need to ask people, can you give us the information, the result? Because the people in the companies, in the funeral homes, they have data analysts. They have business intelligence. I don't need to make the graphs. They can do it. They are also much better equipped in telling us what it is they need. So data, yes, but does that mean we have to have all the data? No, we need to be aware of what information is needed and what exists. We don't need to have everything ourselves. The second part about technology, actually, we started relatively simple because we start with something like Trello. I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard about Trello, but it's an online tool to organize into cards, a bit of Kanban system. We didn't start with using the national system called LCMS in the Netherlands, or some of you might know the international version, ICMS. It was too complicated and it wasn't made for a pandemic. So we started with something that gave us flexibility, a way to organize information. And then we added technology. So we didn't start with the technology, we started with our procedures and then see what we could improve. And it started very basic on day one. But the crux in making all of this work is the way we were organized, or we created a structure. So for those of you who have worked in international contexts, you might know MIRA, the multi-intersectoral rapid assessment tool from the UN. I'm sure in Turkey, your safety services are trained in a certain methodology of organizing information, maybe facts, analysis, needs, or something like that. So we said, what is the structure we need to make this work? So if we're responsible for making sure the Netherlands works, there's actually 4 cells that we look for: public safety and governance, that's OOV, healthcare, zorg, vital infrastructure, international assistance. And for each of those, we're just asking 3 questions. Do we have people and can they be deployed? Do we have the equipment? Can it be used? Is there any process or legal problem? Super simple structure, but it allowed us on day one to start working with Post-it notes and put all the information we got, whether it was a phone call, it was a meeting, it was a tweet, it was whatever, we could write it down and put it in the right column. So this allowed us to organize our information by creating a common language. Any issue could be talked. Is this about people? Is it about stuff? Is it about processes? Okay, just put it in the right column. It looks simple now in hindsight, but this is the foundation of our information management. So later we started, okay, now we have the framework. Now let's start designing processes. So we started making these kind of graphs of which tools we're going to use to get the information and to make it. We even asked colleagues at the TU Delft, where I worked at the time, to help us organize the data management by writing a concept note. And that last part is also interesting because these are students of mine that I invited. And you will have heard that I'm constantly saying, colleagues at TU Delft, the funeral homes, these students, saying you don't have to do everything yourself. You can ask other people to do it. Why would I come up with a data management strategy if there's experts at my university who can do it? They get together one day, they write a concept note. These are students in information management of mine. They needed a thesis project. Well, come along, you can help here and write your thesis about this. There is former colleagues when I worked in a consultancy that I called up and said, we need a system. I know you have one. Can you help us set it up? So information management is also managing other people, managing them to support you and managing them to work with the information. You don't have to do everything yourself, especially in a large crisis. Mobilize, use your networks to support you. And these students did a brilliant job. They trained firefighters, military guys in all kinds of tools. They were a constant help desk all the time, and they all graduated with flying colors. So this brings me actually to what I'm trying to convey here is that if you look at this diagram, we often look at data and technology. You will see a lot of research is about what can we do with data and how can we analyze it, which is great. You know, if you like playing on your computer, if you like technology, and so do I like building stuff, great. But it's in a crisis, it's much more dependent on how you're organized, which people you're working with, and the fit between the technology and the data and you and the crisis situation. So the challenge is much more on the organizational side, on the people side, on the training, than it is on the technology side or the data. We have the data, or we can generate it, or we can get it. We can build with technology anything you want. But the crux is, how do we use it? So 3 lessons. 1, make a common frame of reference. What I did with the Post-its, just starting on a piece of paper. First, make a common frame of reference so everybody knows how to do the information. Start manual, and then train people so we all speak the same language. We all know how to classify information. Next, start making a routine. Make sure you have a process flow. Then we use guidance, and I used materials from you and Ocha, the icons you will see in a minute. So we develop a rhythm. Every day we produce a report. We summarize the Post-its, we produce an output. And finally, we created output. So this is a result here. You will see on the left, on the right, is a monitor we produce every day about these cells. You will see the same 4 cells: Zorg, healthcare, public safety, infrastructure, international. And we use icons, and this is made in PowerPoint. It looks very fancy, but it's just a PowerPoint with some colors. But because we produced this, everybody wanted to be in here. I didn't have to collect any information anymore once we started doing this. Anybody said, why am I not mentioned here? Here's my information. Make sure I'm included in the next one. So it is also a way to get people involved. I'll conclude with saying this. For me, we need to look at technologies, data, and all the other things we have in information management as a tool in a toolbox. We should not come in with a hammer and saying, this is the way we do it. This is our system. This is our way. No, it's one of the assets we have in our toolbox, along with the people, along with the technologies, along with the data. And the challenge is picking the right tool for the right job at the right moment to do proper information management. Okay, I hope I didn't went too much over time, but I tried to keep it brief so there's room for discussion and questions if you have. This was a very quick introduction. I hope I put some controversial statements in there for you to agitate against me or argue with me, and I'm happy to do that. But also any clarifications you want, I'm happy to offer that. Thank you so much.